Thank you very much for that more than generous introduction. Listening to the introduction, I'm reminded of what Dizzy Dean once said when he was being interviewed by a young journalist who had just gone down his whole list of accomplishments. And Dizzy said, "Son, you know, the older we get, the greater we was." So President Benz, Charlie, friends, students, it is a pleasure for me to be with you this afternoon, to be partaking in your fine tradition of scholarship and civic involvement. It is a forum that I've always respected. It is a forum that I always long to partake in. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity. For baseball fans in our home state, 1995 was a remarkable year. It was when Ohio became the third state to have two teams involved in Major League postseason play in the same year. It is regrettable that Georgia's only team killed the Ohio I-71 World Series by knocking out the southern end, and then it compounded its inconsiderate behavior by depriving the northern end of the championship. Charlie, still for Ohioans, this was the greatest baseball year ever until next year. The season was in full swing when I started to think about what I would say here today. Perhaps that is why a baseball story from the 60s came to mind. Even for non-fans, the name Frank Robinson should ring bells. My first paying job was selling peanuts in the old Crosley Field in Cincinnati. And one of that job's most rewarding fringe benefits was watching Frank Robinson play ball. Frank was more than an adequate defensive player in the outfield and at first base, but he was remembered most for being an offensive dynamo. He hit for average and he hit for power. He made all-star teams in both the National and American leagues. He played in the World Series for both leagues. He was voted MVP in both leagues. Frank Robinson became the first African-American hired to manage a Major League Baseball team. He also had the dubious honor of being the first African-American fired. He was one of the two players in what some considered the world's worst baseball trade ever made. Reds management called him old at 30 and traded him to the Baltimore Orioles for a pitcher by the name of Milt Pappas, which had the unfortunate side effect of laying a bad Trivial Pursuit rap on a very good pitcher. The story, which I confess may be apocryphal, takes place after Frank became a Baltimore Oriole. It is the bottom of the ninth. The Orioles are down by 1 run. The bases are loaded, and Robinson is coming to bat. The crowd is going wild, but there's an undercurrent of tension as he approaches the plate. You can cut the tension with a knife. Earl Weaver, the legendary manager of the Orioles, looks over at Frank, who is in the on-deck circle. He must see visions of Grand Slam dancing in Frank's eyes. Weaver crooks his finger and beckons Frank over. He puts his face right in Frank's face, and he says in a deadly tone, "Listen up, Mr. All-Star. Not too hard, not too soft, just la-dee-da." Frank smiles at his manager. He nods, he goes to the plate, and he lays that patent Frank Robinson swing on the first pitch. He hits a frozen rope single to center, and drives in the tying and winning runs. Not too hard, not too soft, just la-di-da. That is what we must learn to do with our government as we enter our third century of nationhood. We are a nation of home run hitters. We have a 200-year history of swinging from our heels. More often than any nation in history, we have hit home runs. But all too often these days, we strike out, especially at the federal level. We have forgotten that our national game is baseball, not sumo wrestling. We have considered it acceptable to weigh 500 pounds as long as we stay strong. It is time for us to get back in shape. It is time for us to learn to be disciplined at the plate. We have to make our government not too hard, not too soft, not too fat, not too lean, not too big, not too small, just la-di-da. And that is not suggesting a carefree approach to our mission of getting limited government back into perspective. It is just the same message that Earl Weaver sent to Frank Robinson. Just get it done. This will not be easy for us because embedded in our national character, indeed embedded in our language, is the idea that bigger is better and smaller is worse. Expansion is good, shrinkage is bad. Generous people are big people. Selfish people are small. Successful companies are green and growing. Unsuccessful companies are contracting and dying. Not until we talk about diets or tumors do we arrive at the idea that becoming larger can be unhealthy and becoming smaller can be beneficial. Yet that is exactly the thinking we must apply to our government if we are to return national growth to places where we want national growth. I submit that we want growth in personal opportunity. We want growth in personal freedom. And for Americans to have more personal opportunity and more personal freedom, we have to reduce the intrusion of government into our lives at all levels, but especially at the federal level. Today, our most conspicuous area of growth is the national debt. Some people think that our nation has been in hock since the time we fought the Revolutionary War on borrowed money. But this is not so. It is true that we entered the 19th century with a debt of almost $100 million, $15 per capita in money of that time. That is, this would roughly be $150 in today's money. The debt then went up when we financed Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase, but it was steadily worked down under James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams. In 1832, Andrew Jackson was elected president, and believe it or not, toward the end of the first term of the first modern Democrat, thanks to rapid economic growth and prudent fiscal management, the debt was eliminated. Our political landscape today would have a very different look if Jackson's Democratic successors had been equally tight-fisted. Through our first century and a half, the national debt reached its highest level as a consequence of wars. And it was always paid down between wars. Expressed in terms of gross national product, the debt was close to half of the GNP coming out of the Revolutionary War. From zero in 1835 and 1836, it went over 25% of the GNP in the aftermath of the Civil War, and again after World War I. It reached its all-time high, about 1.25 times GNP, following World War II. It came down in the 60s and 70s, but its low then was still higher than its highs following the previous century's wars. And from about a third of GNP in 1980, the debt has soared to more than half of the GNP today. What has caused this growth where we do not want growth? Well, I can tell you it's not low taxes. Total tax revenues have more than doubled since 1980. Taxes now consume more than 40% of the income of the average American family. Taxes cost that family more than food, clothing, and shelter combined. Taxation at the state and local government, at local levels, in most parts of the country is relatively restrained. The lion's share of the American family's confiscatory tax burden goes at the federal level. Our federal government is a 500-pound baseball player. There's no meal of tax dollars large enough that it will not wolf down and growl for more. We have to get that monster on a diet before it kills us and itself. The first steps in curbing the federal appetite for our money have just been taken by both houses of Congress in passing budget bills, which will eliminate the deficit in 7 years. Differences between the bills are being worked out as we speak in the conference committee. There is no assurance, though, that the president will not continue his veto binge and prevent these from taking the forms in which they are passed out of the Congress. There's a straightforward solution to this kind of obstacle to balanced budgets and ultimate elimination of the national debt. It is the Balanced Budget Amendment to the Constitution. 49 of 50 states had balanced budgets last year. 48 of those states have balanced budget requirements in their constitutions. There is no doubt that some members of all of those legislatures could and would have found ways to spend more tax dollars than their states took in, but they did not because they could not. We need the same discipline at the federal level. If the subject were not so serious and the need for an amendment so clear, the arguments of the opponents last year would have been funny. They remind me of a wonderful song in an album made some years ago by the singers Harry Belafonte and Odetta. Odetta tells Harry, her husband in the song, to fetch some water. He can't fetch the water because the bucket has a hole in it. She makes a series of suggestions for solving the problem. He has a new objection to every suggestion. Toward the end of the song, she tells him to use a straw to mend the hole. He cannot use a straw because it is dry. She tells him to wet the straw. He cannot do that because he has no water. She tells him to fetch some water, and that brings him full circle. He cannot fetch water because the bucket has a hole in it. Now, the opponents of the Balanced Budget Amendment came up with an array of arm-waving objections to it, some on lofty, if somewhat vague, constitutional principles. But the bottom line is one reason is as good as another when you really don't want to do something. If only one Senate opponent changes his or her mind during this session, the amendment may pass yet during this session. But if that does not happen, the American people will change the composition of the next Congress in order to pass it. And if that prediction is correct, I have to believe that the legislatures of 3/4 of the states will hear the message clearly and make it happen. That is, a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget will make it happen in short order. Requiring the Congress and the President to go online for raising taxes necessary to support their spending will help immensely in reducing the federal appetite for our money. But in my judgment, we need action which goes beyond that. 10 states now require a supermajority in their legislatures to increase taxes. I am a strong advocate of this form of taxpayer protection, and I believe that Ohio will soon join the 10 states which have it in place. The supermajority idea will be applied at the federal level. It should be applied at the federal level. Opponents say that it is somehow anti-democratic to require more than a simple majority to raise taxes. They apparently think it is all right to require 2/3 majority when the subject is amending the Constitution or going to war or impeaching the president. But such a requirement is not all right when the subject is taking the property of one citizen to give to another or others. It would be interesting to see what the result would be if this question of a supermajority requirement were put to a national referendum. I have a hunch it would pass by a supermajority. The third idea of taxation, which belongs in the federal government's diet, is the tax code. All of us know that it is a mess, but just how much a mess strains belief. In 1950, the tax code had 103 sections. It now has 1,564 sections. In the past 40 years, Congress has on average changed the tax code every 1.3 years. Since the last major overhaul in 1986, there have been 4,000 changes in the tax code. There are 17,000 pages of Internal Revenue Service rules. Each year, the IRS prints 8 billion pages of tax forms. Americans spend 5.4 billion hours filling them out, and individuals and corporations spend in excess of $250 billion annually just to comply with the tax code. In case you can't get your minds wrapped around the tax code, they give you a 1-800 number to call the IRS. Oddly, there's a 1 in 4 chance that you can't get through, and if you do get through, there's a 15% chance that you're going to get bad information. I believe that the time is right to simplify the federal tax system to a point where we can reduce Form 1099 to a postcard and virtually eliminate the Internal Revenue Service. I am serving on a national commission to reshape the tax code for Senator Dole and Speaker Gingrich. Our chairman is Jack Kemp, and we're serving with 12 other Americans from across the country. Our mission is a major overhaul, not an academic review. I cannot discuss the deliberations of the commission at this point in our work, but I can discuss some ideas I have about what I believe a better tax system would look like. I have a strong personal bias towards systems which encourage savings and investment. I would prefer a system which would tax consumption instead of income, but for solid, practical reasons, mostly rooted in the inseparability of our national economy from the global economy, I think we will continue to rely on the basic structure of an income tax. But we can and we must vastly simplify our income tax. The starting point is a single rate tax rate at about or below 20% of income. I favor a substantial exclusion from paying this tax, perhaps $30,000 to $35,000 for a family of four. This structure passes the test of fairness and progressivity. As incomes go up, the percentage of taxes represent of income goes up, though in no case will they reach the single rate because the initial exclusion will not be subject to recapture. I favored retaining three deductions from gross income. One is mortgage interest. This helps young wage earners achieve home ownership without having to wait through a lifetime of wealth building. I realize that this amounts to accomplishing a socioeconomic objective through the tax code, but I believe the benefits to families and neighborhoods make it worth this exception to theoretical purity. The second is money placed by individuals in savings towards retirement. We can tax that money as it comes out of savings, but while it is saved, we should let it grow. And the effect of exempting savings is to turn the income tax into a consumption tax without the complexity or wrenching transition that would be involved in moving to a national value-added tax or a national sales tax. The third deduction is charity or charitable contributions. As we move to replace government largesse with private initiative, we need to stay away from tax disincentives. We should apply the same single rate to individuals and corporations. Doing so eliminates the historical incentives to move in and out of incorporation. We should apply the same single rate to capital gains as to income. This will eliminate a ton of IRS rules designed only to distinguish between the ways people make money. These then are the key elements at stake in our federal diet. One, a balanced budget amendment to compel our government to live within its means. Two, a supermajority tax increase requirement to compel government to look first to its spending habits to balance its budget. And three, a clean, simple, fair, economic growth-oriented system of taxation to restore incentives to work, save, and invest. The next question is, what do we do at the outgo end? The answer is devolution. The answer is government change, which is faithful to the principle of subsidiarity, of the notion that the government closest to the people is the government that should have the most responsibility, because that is the level of government that people can get at most quickly. The answer is change which reverses the upward flow of money and power and sends it back to the levels of government, as I mentioned, that are closer to the people governed. Ladies and gentlemen, the modern centralized welfare state is built on a foundation of three wrong ideas. The first is that government can do a better job with our economy than the market. Wrong. The second is that bureaucrats can make better decisions about what is good for families than the families themselves. Wrong, wrong. And the third is that the work ethic is outdated and that we can have a healthy society which has disconnected effort from return, work from benefit. Wrong, wrong, and wrong again. Let me just give you a short example. How many of you would ever phantom walking into your place of employment right after the birth of a new addition to your family and telling your boss, we just gave birth to a new baby girl or baby boy, therefore I expect a raise? Well, we've created a welfare state that tells a young woman, 17 years old, who has just had her second baby out of wedlock, that there's a cash incentive for that illegitimacy, for that out of wedlock birth. We have in fact flipped it on its head. There's probably a fourth wrong idea, and that is the idea of moral relativity. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to right those wrong ideas. We must reawaken our recognition of the fact that in most domestic matters, the states can perform more effectively and efficiently than the federal government. Our founders knew this. Senator Dole and Congressman Bob Dornan have repeatedly reminded their audiences of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the amendment which has been honored in the breach for most of the 20th century. It reads in one powerful sentence, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people." It really doesn't stop there. In most domestic matters, cities and counties can perform more effectively and efficiently than the states. In many domestic matters, neighborhoods and families can perform more effectively and efficiently than cities and counties. Families can perform more effectively and efficiently than any level of government in deciding what they want to do with their money. General Colin Powell says it very well in his autobiography. Every tax dollar taken away from a consumer or a business is a dollar that will be spent less efficiently than if it was left in private hands. We are only just beginning to apply this thinking at the federal level, but successful states and local government models are out there that can show the way. I have in my formal remarks, which I am sure will be distributed to you, a description of what has taken place in the city of Indianapolis, a city that I have followed as an academic and as an interested citizen. What Steve Goldsmith has done in Indianapolis with his commission called the Celtic Commission, which is, Celtic is short for Service, Efficiency, and Lower Taxes for Indianapolis Commission. They have been able to save $100 billion in the city's budget through looking towards entrepreneurial, turning to entrepreneurial approaches, privatization, just more competitive models of funding city services. And so I won't take you through that, but I would ask you to read it as copies of the speech are made available to you, because I really want to wind up talking about something that I observed last week. And it's consistent with this whole notion of pushing power and money down the chain back to families and individuals. The principle of subsidiarity can help us deal with two of our most intractable national problems: what to do about Social Security and Medicare. The cynicism of our young people towards Social Security is a matter of real concern. A recent poll of 1,600 Americans between the ages of 18 and 35, Generation X, showed that more than, on a 2-to-1 basis, more of them expected to see a UFO in their lifetime than a Social Security check. I was in Santiago, Chile last week to review what has been done there over the past 15 years with their Social Security system. In 1980, their approach looked a lot like ours, a system of transfer payments featuring high withholding taxes and endless, futile struggle to keep benefits up with inflation. In 1981, the government offered workers a choice of staying in the old system or moving to a new system in which a mandatory 10% of wages was automatically invested in an individual's investment account with an option to add as much as another 10%. The worker chooses one of several, now I think 22, private pension fund administration companies, better known as AFPs, with which to invest the accumulated dollars. The AFPs are like mutual funds, putting money in stocks, bonds, and government debt. Workers are free to move from one AFP to another, so there's competition among the companies to provide higher returns and better service. About 1/4 of the Chilean workforce signed up for the new system in the first month. About 90% are now in it. The results have been phenomenal. More than half of Chile's retirees have done so well that they have taken early retirement. I believe that a lot of Americans would choose this sort of system of individual empowerment over the present Social Security system or UFOs. The 38 million beneficiaries of the current system and the number of workers in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who cannot have a full working career under the savings plan present transition problems as we change systems. We cannot break faith with these people, but we do not need to. The problems are formidable, but they are surmountable so long as we fund the transition through reduced government spending in other areas and not future borrowing. A conceptual similar idea is emerging to deal with Medicare. The idea is medical savings accounts. And these individuals would be able to put an amount like $3,000 into a tax-free account. The money could come either from the employer or the employee. Some form of catastrophe insurance would cover expenses beyond the first $3,000, but the effect would be to put individuals in charge of expenditures for routine care, medication, eyeglasses, and the like. This would bring most health care expenditures under control of the marketplace, with all of the attendant benefits of competition and price comparison. This then is the shape of the revolution which we see as being our route to prosperous and successful third and fourth centuries of nationhood. Devolution to give us lean, responsive government with power and the money where it belongs, closest to the people, not too big, not too small, just la-di-da. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think you make my point that Medicare run by big government is inefficient, insensitive, and something that has to be changed. Yes, sir.
What do you think the likelihood of a flat tax is in the remaining session of this Congress or the next?
I don't think that we will see a flat tax in this session. I don't think that we will see a flat tax enacted before 1998. I think it will be the pivotal issue in the presidential debates during 1996. I think Congress will then wrestle with it in 97. I think definitely by the end of the decade, but the year 2000, we will have a radically different tax system. Yes, sir. Yeah. As we're debating this issue, there is one proposal that's on the table that's getting a real hearing, and that is that what you do is you eliminate, you have a single rate, and you tax all income once at its source. That is a very simple, straightforward way of addressing the double taxation issue. And I must say that it is an issue or a position that is gaining a lot of support in our commission debates. I can also tell you that I am relatively convinced, and I'm not speaking too much out of school, that the new tax system will eliminate the alternative minimum tax. It would eliminate what I think is the most anti-American tax, and that is the estate tax. And I'm pretty sure that we will either have capital gains that's either affected by the single rate, and that's 20% or less, or we will have a zero rate for capital gains. And I think what we will see is what we saw in the 80s, absent spending discipline, and that is we will see a rapid economic growth. We will see an increase in tax revenues spurred by the economic growth. And if in fact we can curb the federal government's spending appetite, we will in fact be well positioned to make sure that the 21st century is also the American century. Thank you.